Welcome to this meeting on After Orlando, the global fight against LGBT plus oppression. As you'll be aware, this event takes place in the wake of 49 people being murdered in a nightclub in Orlando and 50 people injured. And we'll be aware in the wake of this, the finger was pointed at Muslims and Islam. Even though the murderer was born and bred in America, the media were keen to latch on to that straight away. My name's Jeff Dexter, I'm from the SWP in Birmingham, and I helped form LGBT Against Islamophobia, and I'm proud to be one of the comrades, many comrades around the country, that took part in the statement condemning homophobia, transphobia and Islamophobia, and read that out to 1,000 people at a vigil in Birmingham. Many other comrades will have similar experiences, and I hope you can share those in the meeting as part of the discussion. It's with great pleasure I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Nicola Field, who's a writer and original member of Lesbian and Gays Support the Miners. She's also the author of this book, and there will be a signing at the end outside, so it would be great if you could come along to that. Daly, who's the co-founder of Time for Inclusive Education. Edwin Sesange, director, Out and Proud Diamond Group. And Antony, Rizk, from the Socialist Forum in Lebanon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nicola Field.
Don't really know how to do it.
I think people can hear you.
Really? Can you hear me? Because I have to go like this, you see. I'd rather be going like this, to be honest. So, I have done it. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm also a member of the Socialist Workers Party in South London. The position of lesbian LGBT people as an oppressed group is in a very, very highly contradictory moment. We've won various gains, got anti-discrimination legislation. We've got a lot of greater visibility and social acceptance. We've got the same-sex marriage. But we don't have anything approaching liberation. And I think the Orlando shootings are an absolutely sharp reminder of the continuing ideological and physical threat experienced by LGBT people. And I think that people have impressed upon me, LGBT people of colour and trans people, thank you, trans people experience that threat on a daily basis. And it's also a reminder of the continuing way that politicians and the media now use LGBT people, I would say routinely, to try and whip up hatred against other groups on their divide and rule agenda, and namely those other groups are Muslims and refugees. The fact that the Orlando killer, Omar Martin, was of Afghan descent was immediately seized on by the media to try and stoke up Islamophobia. Another one of the contradictions is that the legal gains that have been won by LGBT people campaigning over many years can be taken away. We've got trade union legislation taking away trade union rights. We've got the Housing Act taking away housing rights and smashing council housing. We've got immigration laws, making it harder and harder and harder for people to come to this country and feel safe. And we're looking at a contender for the Tory leadership, Stephen Crabb. He's got overt links to homophobic groups that consider homosexuality to be a disease that can be cured. He voted against same-sex marriage, and this is somebody that is aiming to be Prime Minister. So all these things can be reversed. It's very fluid. Nothing is certain. Now, I want to argue that there's really no such thing as a unified single LGBT community with common goals. And in fact, I don't know how far I need to argue that now, because I think it's really widely recognised. For instance, the Pride in London parade has become a completely contended site. It's a political battleground. There are protests against the commercialisation, the fact that companies like Barclays and Starbucks are put ahead of community groups and political campaigns on the parade. People are fed up with it. They can, they argue against it, quite rightly. Sorry, I'm not. Where's the best place? Here? Down a bit. Thanks. The fact that the Pride in London parade is directed by Tories, including Boris Johnson and Cameron's head of political broadcasting, has made people boycott it. There were anti-militarisation protests before the Pride in London parade this year, because it was announced that the red arrows were going to fly over the Pride March. Pride organisers obviously feel under pressure, and they're on the defensive because they're always, defending the fact that there's lots of community groups on Pride. And this year, I feel tokenistically, they put Peter Tatchell's human rights campaign at the head of the parade, and I'm glad to see them there, absolutely. But I think that the Pride organisers felt completely under pressure to do that. Because of the outrage that is coming from below about the agenda of Pride. Other sites of resistance, the group ACT UP is attacking health cuts and demanding universal access to the PrEP medication to reduce HIV infection, which you would think would be obviously something that would be available to everybody on demand, and it's not. Another contradiction is that despite all the anti-refugee propaganda, there's a high level of sympathy with refugees amongst LGBT people, despite politicians continuing to portray the abandoned human beings on the borders of Fortress Europe as sexist homophobes who, if they were allowed in, would rush around beheading LGBT people and raping every woman that they saw. A lot of people who voted Remain in the EU referendum voted Remain in solidarity with those refugees. But I have to say that a lot of people who voted Leave voted in solidarity with those refugees. It's really important to remember that we had a unified aim in the referendum. So I think that there's a generalised awareness in the movement of the moral and political discrepancies that it contains with all the different groups and the different forces and the different interests that are active in the movement. But the question is, how do people who want to change the world relate to this, and how do they build the resistance in this context? And I hope that people will, in the discussion, respond to that question, because I can only offer a few suggestions, and I can't answer that question totally. I was in the States when the Orlando shootings happened. I went to the vigil outside the Stonewall Inn, and I was actually, when I arrived, I was nervous of how people may have been manipulated by the Islamophobic response in the media and by the politicians. Actually, no. People were defiant against homophobia. They were saying we're going to have nothing to do with spreading more hate against other groups. We're not Islamophobic. I spoke to somebody who said, she was Daisy, her name was. She was on the first gay pride march ever in New York. She said that after 9/11, she didn't see Muslim women and children in the local park for 8 years, and she was part of a community campaign to build solidarity with Muslims in her area of Brooklyn. And another thing that people were angry about in New York, contrary to what I was afraid of, was that people were angry that the state was using the event to try and sort of big up the police, make the police look like heroes, when in fact it was the LGBT people that had cared for those who were injured on the, at the scene. Thanks, Jeff. And the police presence on that vigil in New York was huge, and there were anti-terrorist police, and they had anti-terrorist police written on their backs. So they were using the opportunity to promote the armed wing of the state, and using that shooting. I think there was I was very proud, because I was in the States, I was very proud to see that there was a similar response in the UK, as Jeff said. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to manage that. There was a similar response from people in the UK. As soon as the shooting happened, LGBT Against Islamophobia, which was a group that formed directly out of the LGSM group, issued a statement which went viral, and everyone wanted to sign it. And what I want to say is the media did not win that argument, and the media is not all-powerful. Back at the end of May, I was invited by West Midlands TUC to help lead the trade union contingent. We took LGBT Against Islamophobia. We also took health workers, part of the bursary and bus campaign. We linked up with the trade unionists in Victoria Square. We had a massive pro-refugee, anti-austerity chanting session. It grew and grew and grew. There were so many people. The Pride organisers wanted us to get out of the way because the commercial sponsored float needed to get past to lead the parade, and we just sort of held firm for a bit, and we held firm for a bit, and we hung on, and we ended up leading the parade, and we had a massive anti-racist, anti-austerity contingent leading Pride through the city centre of Birmingham to, cheers from the rafters. In London it was different. I and other activists had made formal and informal representations to the TUC saying, please invite all anti-austerity and anti-racist groups to march with the unions. We want to be with you. We want to use this opportunity to unite. Unfortunately, it fell on deaf ears. And in fact, the TUC had pulled out of sponsoring Pride and did absolutely nothing to use the event to build the trade union movement and the fight against austerity. The unions did turn up, but there was no coordination. LGBT Against Islamophobia assembled in the trade union section with Stand Up to Racism, and we were joined at their own request in the lead up to the Pride March by Disabled People Against Cuts, and they made a special banner for the Pride March in solidarity. I can't tell you how moved and honoured I was to march with Deepak. Also, the heroes at Barnet Unison, who have been fighting privatisation of council services in Barnet, came to march with us as well in response to the shootings at in Orlando. We found an LGBT against support of refugees from Leicester, a group. They'd brought their own banner, and there was an openly heterosexual couple who were carrying a Roma flag and a homemade placard that said, "Defend LGBT Roma." I just want to pay tribute to these people. I want to say, how many other anti-racist and anti-austerity groups were there on Pride who would have responded to the TUC's call if they'd had made one, but we didn't know they were there. Okay, so I'd put that down to a complete abnegation of responsibility by the trade union leadership. By some fluke, I'm going to be quick. By some fluke, we found ourselves sandwiched between a small bannerless group of LGBT Tories and a somewhat larger gathering of the Labour campaign for LGBT rights, and it was a very, very bizarre type of political intensity with us in between. But it was obviously an opportunity to hammer the Tories. After the EU referendum, we can't let the Tories recover, so we didn't want them to feel good in any way. And we didn't want the Labour right to get the upper hand in their attack on Jeremy Corbyn, who also came to Pride and was heckled by people in that Labour contingent. So we were relentless. Throughout the entire march, we were shouting Tories out, refugees in, and other things like that. Many younger Labour activists from that group behind us filtered forward and joined us silently. They became part of our contingent. Dozens were leaping over the police barriers to join us and join in the shouting. And the crowd on the sidelines were literally cheering us to the skies and joining in our chanting. And they were out chanting us with Tory scum because they saw the Tories were next to us. So this is just to say it's a highly volatile, fluid political atmosphere. The question I want to put out is, what else is to be done? I hope that tonight we'll debate and discuss how we build the resistance in this highly volatile context. Thanks very much.
Next, I'd like to introduce Jordan Daly, and please do have a think about what you might like to say. We'll have plenty of time for discussion. People will be able to have 3 minutes each to make a contribution. But without further ado, Jordan Daly.
I'm just going to preface the speech by letting you know that on the 5-hour train down here, I've somehow developed a cold, so I'm very bunged up and sniffly, so I'm not usually this, but it's okay, I'm not taking drugs. I want to just kind of start by highlighting that when I was booked to do this speech, it was called Global LGBT Resistance. There was no after Orlando there because Orlando hadn't happened. And I'm actually just sitting here thinking, I'm looking at the flyer and thinking that this should not be what this event's about. Those 2 words at the beginning of this event should not even be there. We shouldn't even be talking about the 49 people who were killed. And it's sad because it was so unnecessary. And I think that's what's probably resonated with quite a lot of us who are from the LGBT community. Now, I'm only 21. I'm a gay man. And I've been open and quite comfortable for a few years now. But this was the first time for me that it felt very personal, because it wasn't Pulse nightclub that was under attack. It was bigger than that. This was an attack on me. It was an attack on many of us here. It was an attack on our community. It was an attack on what we spent decades building. It was an attack on confidence. It was an attack on solidarity, and it was an attack on strength. And what frustrated me quite a bit, actually, in the immediate aftermath, and I didn't expect this, and I've been involved in LGBT campaigning, which I'll get to in a minute, for a year now in Scotland, so maybe it was naive of me. I did not expect that the media would have been so quick to write the LGBT community out of the narrative. So quick, almost immediately. Here was a story that was presented to them which was clear. The worst attack on our community for generations, but they couldn't see that. This was ISIS. This was terrorism. That's why we need prevent. Not maybe we should start having an open and honest conversation about LGBT identities in school. No, we need to go into schools and start targeting, let's find who the extremist children are. That was the way the narrative was spun, and it frustrated me a lot, actually. But I think one of the most frustrating things about the Orlando shooting was that the shooter, and I don't want to say his name because I don't want to justify it on this platform. I actually think that the names we should be saying are the 49 who were killed. So the shooter, it's since emerged that apparently he himself was a frequent of Pulse nightclub and had been on gay dating apps. And I don't know about many of you, and maybe this is a bit of a controversial thing to say, but for me it suddenly changed a little bit how I felt about the situation, because all of a sudden there was one other person, I would never say he was a victim, but one other person who had been messed up by heteronormativity, one other person there was one other person in there who, rather than taking his anger out with a suicide attempt or with self-harm, chose to absolutely unacceptably go into a nightclub and start firing a weapon. And it changed the entire thing quite a bit for me, because it made very clear that no, this could have been prevented, it could have been. And then when you see his dad in the media, I wish he never done that, because God will punish the gays. And it's not difficult to see why this happened. And then his ex-wife comes out and says, we always thought that he was gay or bisexual, but his dad bullied him for it. And the more you hear, the more you think this did not have to happen, and this could have been prevented. And I think what was quite hard-hitting for me was that a lot of people started saying, this is America though, this would never happen here. And I spoke at a vigil in George Square in Glasgow, and when confronted with that argument, the response was that at the root of this attack was hate on all ends. Hate for people like me who could live openly, confidently, comfortably, and also an inner hatred. And that hatred can manifest itself in a lot of ways. So while our LGBT community or people in this country might not have easy access to automatic fire weapons, we've got easy access to pills. We've got easy access to razor blades. We've got easy access to a noose. Our community and the hatred that is still in so many of us manifests itself, particularly in young people, in very, very violent ways, whether it's violence towards other person or violence towards the self. And this brings me on to the TIE campaign, which I co-founded. Some of you might remember me and Liam from last year, but we came down here last year, Marxism 2015, a week before we were due to launch the campaign publicly. And we came down hoping to try and build some connections in the trade union movement. And our campaign was launched on the ethos that if we are going to weed homo, bi, transphobic attitudes out of this society, then we need to start getting into the classrooms and we need to tackle it now. So we came down last year. I remember it was in this very room actually, Nicola Field was presenting, it was the LGSM video, and I asked a question from the forum. We had a petition, and eventually what happened with that petition was the Scottish Parliament rejected it, which was good for us because it allowed us to get angry and it allowed us to say they do not care. We've got thousands of signatures in this position, we've built a big campaign and they are not caring about this. And what's essentially happened since then is we generally refocused our aims. Liam and I started getting into schools. We were speaking to young people, we were speaking to teachers, and what we realised was that teachers don't have the confidence or the skills or the ability to actually address these issues in the classroom, and it's very easily done, particularly in Scotland with a very flexible curriculum that we have. And so we started asking for teacher training. We have to train teachers specifically on LGBT issues. We have to look at teachers who are currently serving, and we have to look at teachers who are in training. Because while Section 28 was repealed 16 years ago, we are dealing with its hangover right now in schools. We're absolutely dealing with its hangover. And it's not until you go into schools and speak to the young people and you see the laceration marks on people's arms. Just today, actually, we had a feature, a double-page spread in one of the national newspapers in Scotland, and Liam and I are quite big. This is a grassroots campaign. We don't take any money from the government, but we're quite big on giving a voice to the voiceless, so we've always put personal stories to the forefront of the campaign. And in today's paper, we had identified 3 young people who have dealt with these issues at school, and there's one thing that really stands out to me is a trans kid called Dean, and we go into his school quite a lot, we work with him very closely, but in fact, do you know what, I'll read it out to you just very quickly, because I'll end up paraphrasing and I think it's quite powerful and important that you hear. In Dean Coyle's house, he has a small black box containing around 30 pencil sharpeners. They act as a reminder of the transgender 18-year-old's not too distant past, of his school days and times that he is not quite ready to let go of. For the last 4 years, he carried the box wherever he went, and every so often he would open it, find one that he liked, carefully unscrew the blade and cut himself in school. Now, we've met this kid, and there are laceration marks all over his arms. And when we are speaking with the government, when we are campaigning in Scotland, when we are starting debate up there, what we're saying is that this is a live issue. When our petition was rejected, Liam and I co-wrote an article for one of the national newspapers, and what we'd said in there was, enough is enough. Every single time that a young LGBT kid puts a noose around their neck or takes a razor to their flesh, every one of your parliamentarians in that chamber has blood in their hands because they're sitting with their fingers in their ears and they're doing nothing about this. And that caused quite a bit of backlash, but in testament to doing things differently, which we can do because we don't take money. And no disrespect, but organisations like Stonewall or LGBT Youth or the Equality Network, they can't say things like that because they're government funded and they're corporate funded. We take money for the trade union movement, which I'll go on to very quickly in a minute. There's another point I want to get to about that. That caused a very big stink, that article, but it led to our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, describing herself as a huge supporter of our campaign. And now what's happened is in the elections, we had the Scottish elections in May, every single major political party referenced our campaign and picked up our calls to have teachers trained on LGBT issues, which means that this is effectively going to be done in Scotland. They have been elected on that mandate, and if they think that we are going anywhere when that's happened, then they're absolutely wrong. And very quickly, just I think it's relevant to the event that we're at. This couldn't be possible without the trade union movement. Like I say, this campaign has cost a lot of money, and we rely on branch donations. So we came down here in 2015 looking for support from some trade union connections to try and get some trade union support. In April 2016, the STUC unanimously passed a motion to back our campaign, meaning that we had every single trade union in Scotland on board with us. And the key point to that was that we now had the teachers' unions on our side. And what that means is that the government is very much backed into a corner. They can't move. And just to wrap up, there's a lot more kind of that I did want to say, but 10 minutes always flies in. But I just kind of want to make clear that in Scotland in particular, with the way that our schools are set up, we've got the majority of our schools are Catholic schools, just to be blunt. LGBT education was always a huge issue. Even today, Liam and I got another death threat. We were told that if we tried to make this mainstream that we would die. So this is a very, very big issue. But this started from me talking to Liam about my own experience, my own suicidal thoughts when I was younger. We had no money, no connections, no resources, nothing. And less than a year later, we've got the First Minister singing our praises, and we've got every single party in that Scottish Parliament with a promising to train teachers on these issues. So it's that key point of you can take things on, and all it really takes is an idea, and just be bold, be ballsy, and say fuck them. If they've got blood in their hands, tell them they've got blood in their hands. Don't be cute with it. Have the real conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. And without further ado, I'd like to Jordan, introduce Edwin, Director of Out and Proud Diamond Group.
Hope you'll excuse me, I've got a bad throat. Yeah. Today, there are over 70 countries in the world that criminalize homosexuality. A bigger percentage of those countries are former colonies of United Kingdom, country where we are right now. Even though in most of the Western world countries, being LGBT or being able to legally get married is legal, but in most of our countries, for example, where I come from, Uganda, being LGBT can lead to persecution, prostitution, torture, discrimination, or even death. But that situation can no longer go on the way it is right now. We have to challenge it. And at this point, I call upon each and every of you here to join in whatever struggle it is out there to bring all this to an end. I know there are so many struggles going on out there. Please join them if you can. Some LGBT people like me have managed to escape from those countries and seek refuge in other countries, including United Kingdom. I am a refugee from Uganda, living in the UK. So people have gone to countries like Netherlands, France, America, Canada, and other countries. But in doing so, there are so many problems that people face. And being a refugee myself, and experienced discrimination in my mother country, I had to come up with my other colleagues to form up a group that could address some of the problems above and below, because we realized that change can only be affected by the people within first. So we had to be our own voices first, because I remember 2009, I attended a protest outside Uganda House. And immediately after the protest, newspapers in Uganda started saying that, look at the West, they are trying to bring homosexuality to our countries, because most of the people outside Uganda House were of a different nationality. But they were there to support us, Africans, Ugandans. So we realized that we've got to be at the front line in order to challenge these people. So Out and Proud, which is an African LGBT organization, was formed in 2011 and became more active in 2013 to challenge homophobia, campaign against mental health and HIV in the LGBT community, and also support LGBT asylum seekers and refugees. The organization operates now in 3 countries, France and Netherlands. We have weekly meetings that are helping our members to access support services and also socialize. Being a community organization, we're first point of contact for many LGBT asylum seekers and those in detention centers. So when we come over here, we have to prove our sexuality. And you can imagine the way you can prove your sexuality. We have experienced firsthand the mistreatment of LGBT people by the UK government and other governments. On many occasions, I've been a witness supporting many LGBT asylum seekers in courts in the UK. And I've been asked many, many questions. On one occasion, actually this was in Yazwood, I was asked whether I used scientific methods to prove whether this lady is a lesbian. I found that offensive, and I had to ask whether they do that to people. After the court, I launched an official complaint, and this gentleman was actually taken back to do some courses, because the way he was asking people was unacceptable. It happened to me, and I had to challenge it. Many LGBT people are in detention centers. I've been speaking to a gentleman who's been there 9 months. You can imagine, 9 months. And he's only allowed to access internet just 1 hour a day. 1 hour a day. It's not a criminal, it's just an asylum seeker. But put in detention centers where he can only access internet 1 hour a day. I think that's unacceptable, because he's not a criminal. He shouldn't even be there. Those places shouldn't exist. So we should do whatever we can to cross them down. And that needs each and every body of us here, and even encouraging others outside to join in. Just a few months ago, one lesbian asylum seeker was facing deportation from the United Kingdom because of not being in a relationship in the past 5 years. They said, you're not a lesbian because you haven't been in a relationship the past 5 years. And she was facing deportation. All this information is online. So she got in contact with us and said, no, this is unacceptable. We started a campaign. So she was facing deportation, I think, in about like 4 days. We started a petition and we organized a protest as well. So I had to go to the court to witness and ask whether being a lesbian requires people to be in a relationship. There are so many people out there who are not in relationships. That doesn't mean they are not gay. I don't know whether you agree with that, but I don't. I went to court and challenged this decision. I was the only witness in that courtroom. And I said to the judge, Your Honor, this is unacceptable. There are so many people I know out there who are not in relationships, but, they are gay. The judge allowed the appeal. She's now in the UK. Then another one, this one I think like 3 weeks were in Hatton Cross. She was refused asylum by the Home Office and by the judge because she wasn't a member of any LGBT organization and she had not been to any gay bar. So she's not a lesbian. Okay? So I went to court and I was asked by the Home Office, Mr. Edwin, this lady was denied asylum by the Home Office and the previous judge. What makes you think she's a lesbian? The grounds are there. And I said to the gentleman, I looked him in the eyes and said, I don't agree with the previous judge, neither with the Home Office. Because just because she hasn't been to any gay bar doesn't mean she's not a lesbian. That means that all gay people should go to gay bars just to prove that they are gay. No, it's not. It was a brave step to take in the court because this girl's life was at stake. But I had to be bold and ask that question. Luckily, we won the case. She's now free. I was also asked in court, Mr. Edwin, this gentleman has got 2 kids in Uganda and he's a Catholic. He's not gay. And I said to the gentleman, I've got bishops who are my friends and they are gay and they're pastor and some pastors. So what do you say about that? The judge accepted and the gentleman won the appeal. So as you can see, there are so many problems that asylum seekers face. But we need your support in many ways. Unfortunately, our organization is not funded, but we try to do our best. But many asylum seekers, including me, don't want to leave our countries. No, we don't. It's cold here, very cold. You see? I grew up in 32 degrees. But what makes me leave my country to come to the UK is because of my life. So we have to do something about it. Our organization, Out and Proud Diamond Group, has been outside most of these homophobic embassies. Last January, we went to Canterbury to challenge the archbishops there. You heard what happened there. The archbishop had to apologize because we are making a lot of noise. Then we started a petition. As you know, 42 countries, these are former colonies of Britain. I always say this, Britain brought homophobia to my country. and I will never apologize. Indeed, I've asked the Prime Minister to apologize, but he hasn't. So, as you know, in 2018, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings is taking place in the UK here. So we started a campaign. Yeah, I'm wrapping up. We started a campaign to ask them to put LGBT rights issues on the main agenda and to adopt a theme which is equal and diverse Commonwealth, and invite open LGBT people like me to speak to these leaders. Because even though we cannot do so in our countries, but using the international platform, I'm safe here, I can tell them. Indeed, I've written a lot of articles about these leaders. So we need to address these leaders. Because the more they hear from the Western world, they think it's the West. But if I tell them and other African people, there's no way you can tell me that homosexuality was exported to Uganda or to other countries. No, it's homophobia. We all know that. But some media houses don't want to accept that. So that's why we keep on banging on it. So please, we request you to do whatever you can to sign the petition. It's online. If you can go on our Facebook page, you can sign the petition, share it with other people. We're soon organizing a protest to hand in that petition. We want to put pressure on the British government to put LGBT rights on the main agenda of the CHOGM meeting 2018. And we need your support. Thank you so much because of time.
And finally, I'd like to introduce Antony from the Socialist Forum in Lebanon.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to come and speak. It really has been a fantastic Marxism this year for me. I've been here twice before, and this is really the one that I've gotten the most out of, I think. I'm going to be talking about mostly the state of work on sexual liberation in Lebanon. Sorry, is this too far away or too close? Is this fine? Lower, okay. And I'm mostly going to be talking about the different political actors at play and how the movement has progressed and changed, and then sort of give a lot of contextual information. And give also a small comment about, as revolutionary socialists in Lebanon, what is our position, how do we work on it, what is our approach. It's of course a very complicated issue. We all know working on sexual liberation isn't easy. But it's made very complex as well by a country like Lebanon, where we have a politically sectarian, religious sectarian system. So the country is divided, or rather shared, between sectarian political parties that are divided across sects, Christian, Muslim, Sunni, Shia, so on, as well as in a region that has a lot of war, a lot of conflict, and a lot of militarization, and a rising nationalism that is taking place. I still hear an echo. Is there something I can do about that?
Oh, this is still on, so it's feedback.
Oh, okay.
Oh, but you can't turn it off.
Okay, I'm going to move a bit closer, I think. There we go. Is that better? Okay, fantastic. So by militarization, I mean several things, and I just want to clarify this in the beginning. It's not just the army, that the army is gaining strength, getting more money, and has more of a presence and ability to do things on the ground in Lebanon. It's also the militarization of the militias of the ruling party, the armament of the entire country, the spread of arms across whole sectors. And I'll be connecting this to what this has to do with homophobia in a bit, and it's connected through a story that I'm going to tell you about a situation that happened 2 years ago, where a local mayor decided that a gay bar in his district was a massive threat to the masculinity and the manhood of his area, and sent his municipal police down to it to shut it down, arrest the people in it. And the municipal police went ahead to arrest trans women, specifically, strip them of their clothes, take pictures of them, and spread them all over the national media, pretty much to humiliate them and say that we, in our district, we are men, we are willing to fight, we are under war, and we need men to protect this town. And we saw flags and flyers go all over the country in this very nationalist and masculinist approach to politics. And this is something that we're seeing more and more now, ever since the increased conflicts, the war in Syria, the strike in Iraq, and so on. But what was really, really interesting about this was that for the first time ever, when this kind of crackdown happened, there was a response. So for the first time, this politician was asked to justify himself, and that was the justification he gave. But also for the first time, you had LGBT groups in the country, you had human rights groups in the countries band together, produce statements, you had international solidarity, and you also had the national media pick up the issue and attack him and say that this is an attack on the dignity of people, along with the anal and virginity tests that are done, and this is unacceptable. And this was an extremely important change, I think, or shift that happened 2 years ago, and suddenly having a response to these kinds of violations when they happen. So how did we get here? And I think a very important part of how we got here is that we've had an active and vibrant LGBT organizing and visible LGBT presence in Lebanon for more than a decade now. And this is within small LGBT groups that are functioning inside the country. I'm going to be talking about the history a bit because I think it's important towards how we look at identity and organizing around LGBT issues outside of the West, so in the global South. When this movement started, it started in the early 2000s, and it brought together a lot of people from different political approaches and from different fields. It brought together anti-war activists, queers who were in the anti-war movement of 2003, the war against Iraq, and it brought together LGBT community leaders, gay bar owners, many different facets. And they came together and decided we are going to organize under the flag, under the umbrella of gay rights, and our political approaches don't matter. As we know that we can't discard politics from this kind of organizing, and 10 years down the line, we saw many splits and a lot of collapses within the LGBT movement because the political tensions within the organizations were too strong. And having reformists and revolutionaries in one organization or organization that works on service provision at the same time is calling for mass mobilization and change on the ground caused a huge rift within the organization that eventually split it in 2011 in a very vicious way. So what's happened since then is, this happened in 2011, and this was a very important shift for the LGBT movement in Lebanon back then, because we saw a massive shift into reformism for the LGBT movement. And this is in a country that is dominated by a lot of NGOs that are working very, 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 very correctly and very importantly on service provision. I think, and this is the point to stress, in a country where you have massive privatization, no universal healthcare, no free healthcare, very bad public education, a very vicious police force, a court that is willing to take people in and imprison them for their sexual acts, and a crackdown on sex crimes. NGOs have played a very important role in sort of buffering this and providing legal aid and health aid and medical aid. But at the same time, the lobbying or the political direction towards change has been for change from above. And by change from above, I don't mean, when I talk about this kind of reformism, it isn't the single issue reformism of let's mobilize a lot of people around this single issue and go to the streets and demand that a certain law is changed. We saw that, for example, with another social movement, with the domestic violence law. But it's more of the people will never be not homophobic. It's a futile attempt to even talk to them about homophobia. So let's use our connections with the ruling parties, with parliament, with so on, to have these laws somehow changed, as if it is to the benefit of our capitalists and benefit of our ruling parties to change such laws that they can use to oppress people. And this is a point I'm going to return to later. But I wanted to sort of focus on at this point is that there has been, over the last 5 years, a kind of abandoning of class politics. And this is important because over those 5 years, it became very apparent that sexual repression and the application of sex laws don't happen to everybody in the same way. There is a class nature in Lebanon, at least I can talk from that, to how it is applied. It is the working class, it is the poor who get arrested, who get imprisoned, who go to jail. And it is others who have the means to escape this kind of oppression who can escape from it. So the class nature, there's a class nature to this kind of sexual oppression, and yet the movement that is addressing it has abandoned these kinds of class politics. And of course, this is within the sort of situation I described earlier of nationalism, militarism, and a lot of, well, I'll get to it now. So I would definitely say that we have seen an increase in a visible LGBT movement. We've also seen an increase in a visible reaction to that, a very important and very, very good reaction of the visibility there. But visibility is another question we can go back to in the discussion if you'd like. But we've also seen in Lebanon at the current moment, so in 2015 and 2016, we see another shift. And we see that suddenly people in Lebanon are starting to organize again. And they're starting to start work on against the establishment, working on public space. I don't know if you heard about this, but we had a garbage crisis last summer, where the streets of Beirut were just filled with trash, entirely filled with garbage and trash. And there was a very large reaction to it. People went down to the capital and we had riots. And there was a very visible presence for us, of us as revolutionary socialists, as well as LGBT and queers and trans persons within this process, within this movement. I'm going to skip ahead a bit and talk a bit about what happened then. Is that another problem I want to sort of identify is the problem with the left in Lebanon. The left that comes from a very, we can say, Stalinist approach, an approach that glorifies the family and glorifies heterosexuality within the family as the only means of preserving the struggle and so on. That when trans persons did join us eventually within these protests, they were told to leave by the people on the ground. And of course, there was a very strong reaction to that, and there was a very strong demand that we need to increase our class base. We cannot be telling gays and lesbians and trans people, as well as refugees and migrant workers and Palestinians and Syrians who are in Lebanon, who are also somehow excluded from this action. In a time of crisis where we want to effect change, we cannot be telling people not to join us. And this was a very strong argument that we posed at the time, and we will continue to pose in the future. So what I wanted to just finish up with, I mean, I can return to a lot of things in the discussion if you'd like. It's a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of different questions. But the strategy that we're following now, or the approach we're following now, is that we need to bring class politics back into the LGBT movements, and we need to bring queer politics and sexuality and gender into the left, and at the same time continue to resist the multiple layers of oppression that we face and repression that we face from the state. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to invite contributions from the floor. I'm going to ask if you could keep your contributions limited to 2 minutes so that we can call as many people as possible. If you'd like to put your hands up now, then I'll take a note and start to call you.
Hello everybody, I'm Gary Gallick from Wigan, SWP. I'm just making a bit of notes. Is it me, or is it the powers to be, that they always try to put us into different categories? Like, shift the blame onto them. Refugees, gays, autism, divide and conquer. I've just lost my job after 20 years. I went down to the Dole office, filling these forms, about 20 pages. I can understand what a comrade said about they ask you all these different questions. And I've just got sort of like a bit of a statement to say on when I try to fill in the form. And they ask you different questions: name, address, national insurance number. And then they say stupid things like, then again, like categories, what religion. And I always put not applicable. Right? And then they say, sexuality, not applicable. So what I'm saying to everybody today, if we all say that, let's confuse them. Not applicable. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gosia and I come from Poland, and I have like two remarks. First, to the comrade from Out and Proud. It's kind of bizarre to determine somebody's sexuality by attending gay bars or gay clubs. I often go to gay bar and gay clubs, and it doesn't really matter anything. And I also have a question to the comrade from Lebanon, and this is the question on Hezbollah. And so my question is, how do you estimate the influence of this religious party on the perception of gay and lesbian community in Lebanon? And I wanted to ask you if their religion is actually working against you, against your community in Lebanon. Thank you.
So I wanted to make a point about tackling homophobia in schools, particularly in relation to the PREVENT strategy, for which there was a meeting earlier today. Because apparently Nikki Morgan, I don't know if is she still Education Secretary? Well, she hard to tell. But she is on record as saying that one symptom of Muslim extremism in schools is pupils coming out with homophobic remarks, which for a Conservative education minister is absolutely outstanding hypocrisy when you consider it was the same party less than 30 years ago, i.e. within adult lifetime of some of us here who are not yet senile, that they brought in Section 28, which, for those of you who may not remember or may not be aware, deliberately prohibited the promotion of homosexuality in schools. And so to have a politician from the same party 30 years later coming out with a remark like that is absolutely outstanding hypocrisy. But it also reinforces the point of the need for an organisation like LGBT against Islamophobia, because there is a perception, I think, among the LGBT community that homophobia is more prevalent among Muslims than elsewhere. I don't believe it. It's not proven. I don't believe why it should be so, but there is definitely a perception there. And the best way to tackle homophobia among Muslims and anybody else, and the perceptions of excessive homophobia among Muslims, which is of itself a form of Islamophobia, is why we need organisations like LGBT plus against Islamophobia.
So yeah, I'm speaking as a young person from Britain, and these atrocities, be it against the LGBT community in Orlando or against the Muslim community, against the Middle Easterns, from my ideological fresh-faced perspective, they're reported, but not enough seems to be reported about the persecution that groups have suffered. And from a personal point of view, I think almost by understanding the persecution that groups suffers is almost as important as the reporting of atrocities themselves. And I don't think enough is done I'm speaking, I was brought up as a Christian. I'm a white male, so I'm hardly qualified to speak on topics such as these. But not enough is done to educate the masses, the majority, the young people of this country, on the plight that is faced by minority groups, be these, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, be this LGBT groups. And I think that by educating the majority, the masses, on the persecution that is faced, it would help people to understand these atrocities. They're reported, but they're reported on the surface. They never go into details about, as you say, you say you stand in solidarity. People might not be able to understand the link between, say, a persecuted minority group such as Muslim people and LGBT people when there is seemingly a rift between them. But I think it's important that people understand the plight of minorities more so than is presented rather than presenting the atrocities as single acts. It's important to understand the persecution as a whole and as a kind of more deep-rooted problem than is presented as single issue atrocities, as it were.
After Paula, it'll be the comrade at the back in the white t-shirt.
Hi, I'm Paula Peters from the National Steering Group of Disabled People Against Cuts, and I made the banner that's on the stage in front of you. And I want to say, Nick, it was an absolute joy. It was absolutely humbling, and it was absolutely amazing to march in solidarity with the Stand Up to Racism and the LGBT community at Pride, and we do it all the time. You know, to the person who spoke before me, we know as disabled people what it's like to be marginalised and persecuted and discriminated against for decades, and no more so than the past 6 years under this horrendous, pernicious Tory government. And it's important to join the strands of the marginalised groups together, because all the attacks on all the marginalised groups are the same. The migrants, refugees, disabled people, the LGBT community, all of us. But we all forget one thing. Deep down, we forget we're all human beings. And Nelson Mandela once said, we are born to love, we are taught to hate. And we have to blame the right-wing media and the government for the hate and the division it causes between groups and turns on one another. And what I say to you now, reach out to every marginalised group, ask why they're being attacked, but more now, with all the racism that we're seeing, now is the time to show solidarity, join the struggles together, fight back and get the Tories out, don't you think?
After this, comrade.
I just wanted to say something about the strange progress of LGBT equality, the way that it's moved in this country, and the effect also that it's had on the LGBT so-called community, because we're sort of lumped together as if we're a community, and the appropriation of LGBT rights and LGBT so-called equality by the right. So, in terms of now you've got gay marriage, and now David Cameron is David Cameron doesn't see it as hypocritical at all. He can invite gay people, whoever, to 10 Downing Street, and so in that way, so Orlando is seen primarily not as an attack on the LGBT community, but as pointing the finger at Islam, and the way that LGBT equality issues have been appropriated by the right in their fight against Islam, and in their characterization of Islam as being uniquely, monolithic, uniquely concerned with LGBT issues, and uniquely prejudiced against LGBT issues. And our side is not, LGBT community is not immune from that. So absolutely shamefully and disgustingly, I think it was 2 years ago at the TUC LGBT conference, actually an overtly Islamophobic motion was passed. Our side is not immune from that. And I think that's why this is the time. All of these things about solidarity are absolutely key. We have to be the ones who stand up and say that we don't believe that Muslims are particularly homophobic, that we don't believe that homosexuality is a particular issue in Islam any more than in any other. But we also have to understand that this is a class thing. Some LGBT members, so-called from our community, will benefit from class issues and will not be on the same side. And that's why it's important always in fighting. We have to make this a class issue. The issue of solidarity with Muslims isn't because we feel sorry for Muslims, or isn't because we think that they're having a hard time. It's because austerity hits all of us, and because it's austerity that is the enemy that we face together and that we need to fight together, and because the ruling class is the enemy that we face together and that we need to fight together. And I think that we have to be aware of what the rights are doing with LGBT rights and be clear on our side of where we stand on that. Sorry, it was a bit garbled.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Tim Evans, South Wales, Swansea, actually. The last time I met up with Nicola was at the reunion at Dulais, at the from the miners and the lesbian and gay support the miners meeting. Was it earlier on this year? Or was it? It was last year. And I just wanted to say something about the. Well, first of all, on Section 28, because although it's been a long time since it's been repealed, the pressure on schools and on teachers has increased. so that although it's been repealed, the amount of pressure in terms of Ofsted, in terms of central curriculum, etc., has scared and still scares a lot of teachers from actually mentioning it at all. So it's important that we actually begin to break that down. But the main point I wanted to make was, growing up in South Wales in the 50s and 60s, although the film Pride, does over-egg the pudding a bit in terms of the levels of homophobia in some of those parts of South Wales, it only brings it up a little bit. Recently, we had in Swansea, there was an LGBT Nigerian guy who was doing a lot of good work, who was an asylum seeker and who was threatened with return to southern Nigeria. And there was, we had a large campaign to actually, it was unfortunately unsuccessful. He was returned, but already in Swansea there was a mix of the campaigns to retain asylum seekers, within Swansea, and also to raise the issue of lesbian and gay rights. And all I really wanted to say was that after Orlando, in about 48 hours, there was a vigil of 500 people in Swansea town centre, which was the biggest political meeting we've seen there for a long, long time. It was arranged at very short notice. None of us expected it to happen, and there were banners there saying, "Don't turn homophobia into Islamophobia." So I just wanted to say that, progress.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chooks from Out and Proud. First of all, what I believe is that persecution makes us stronger. When the way we believe and the way we think affects our life, we always call ourselves minority, but I don't think we are minority. Because if we believe we are minority, the fight might never end. But we will always believe that we are majority, so that we will continue to fight, and this fight, we will succeed. If you go through the Bible, Israelites were persecuted, but today they are strong countries. If you watch Christ, Christ was persecuted. So if you are not persecuted, or if you think that you are always on the right side, I don't think we might be stronger. So what we have to believe in, whether it is homophobia, whether it is Islamophobia, all of them are religion. And both religion preaches love. We have to educate everybody, because I believe that once there is love, there should be nothing like homophobia or Islamophobia. But once there is no love, it will continue to be like that. One thing in life is, no matter how we do it, this referendum has taught us a lot of things, that a lot of people are harboring a lot of things in their heart, which you might not know. But because of what has happened, you have seen that a lot of things are going on people's mind. It's just like when you talk about racism. For you to stamp out homophobia, you must have to stamp out racism. For you to stamp off Islamophobia, you must have to stamp up racism. Let us not call ourselves minority. We are not minority, we are majority. And the fight which we are fighting, we are going to succeed. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think one of the things that I think about listening to the speakers was what a shit bloody world we live in, I mean, it's absolutely outrageous that we lock people up because of their sexuality, and that when they're locked up, they have to be represented by volunteers like Edwin. Like, if I ever get to court, I want you on my side, by the way, man. But, why should this happen? This is outrageous. That young people's lives are ruined. That mental health service they should be able to access are closed. That the Middle East is decimated with war and so on, and creating refugees. that this whole world is a shit, fucked up world. That's one of the things you think from listening to what people are saying. And then you also think, to be honest, that this is a failure of the left as well, actually, because, you know, when you think about what happens across Africa, actually, you're absolutely right about the colonialism exporting homophobia, not exporting homosexuality. But what did the anti-colonial rulers do when they rose up and they got independence for their countries? Actually, I'll tell you what they did. They took those repressive measures that some of the colonialists had in there, and they kept some of those elements because it continued to be a class society, and they wanted to continue to repress the class inside those societies. So they didn't get rid of all those structures. And you see the same thing happening across, you know, you comrade from the Middle East talked about it there. It is a failure of the labour and trade union movement, and the only way that things changed was that people below fought, and that's the optimism that we see here. That's the hope. That's the other side of the coin, isn't it? That from below we can fight. And I think in the course of fighting, we have to transform the left. We have to have a more loud, a more radical, a more diverse, and a more inclusive left. Look at the people who sit in the Houses of Parliament on the opposition bench, even inside the Labour Party, actually. I think one of the good things about Corbyn's victory, Corbyn's progress, is that the number of more diverse people that have entered inside to the Labour Party. But look around the room here and look at us. This is what the opposition should look like. This is what the people sitting inside the Houses of Parliament should look like. It should be ordinary people who are angry and fighting and militant and who demand that we are all included in this movement. Now, the only way that that is going to happen, actually, is if we take advantage of this turmoil now to build the fight from below. And I'll tell you why. The first country in the world to decriminalise homosexuality was the revolutionary government of Russia in 1917. Why? Because Lenin insisted that the revolution was the festival of the oppressed. He insisted that the Revolutionary Party was the tribune of the oppressed, that we didn't just talk about the bread and butter issues, that we took people with us, that we were inclusive, that we refused to be divided, and that we let everybody have their voice. And that is why fighting and getting rid of all the oppressive measures of Tsarism, that include freeing women and sexuality and so on, was central to what they did. And we need to fight for that sort of vision and that sort of left.
After this speaker, unfortunately, we'll need to go back to the panel. I'd like to thank everyone who's indicated. There will be plenty of time to talk at the end at Nicola's book signing, and I'd encourage everybody that has any questions to come and join us and have a chat and a discussion afterwards so that we can all network and organise.
Yeah, thank you. I had the great fortune of being able to spend a lot of time this year travelling around the south of the US, speaking to LGBT activists and kind of researching the history there. And I didn't really realise how relevant, unfortunately, some of this research would be this year when you think about Orlando. And I wanted to talk a bit about before Orlando, actually, because before Orlando, while I was there, we were fighting in North Carolina because of a bill that was being introduced, House Bill 2, and it's being introduced all around the country by Republicans. But North Carolina is really interesting because wrapped up in this bill, it's really spoken about as an anti-trans bill, and that's absolutely right. It's really horrific what it's doing. But what is also in there is an attack on working people, because what it says is you cannot raise the minimum wage. And another part of it says that you can no longer sue your employer if you feel like you've been unfairly dismissed because of your race, because of your religion, all of these things. And then also wrapped up in that is that if one part of that bill falls, the rest stands. And so, I think this meeting said it really well, and especially the comrade from Lebanon said it really well. We need to think very strongly about class and how that comes into it. And I think North Carolina shows that really well, that what we have to do is unite all of us to fight back against that. Because if we allow it to just be, trans people are thrown under the bus, then, it's going to be a travesty. But if we just allow this to be, only overturn one section of it, it's going to be even a bigger issue as well. And, so I think this, it's been really great. And I also want to say, I was down in Soho after, Orlando, and it was absolutely moving to see, I think, thousands of people out there. And while we had the banner, everyone coming up and saying, we want our photo with it, we're going to share it, and we're going to push it out. I think we're in a really good place, and we just need to organise and build on that.
Okay, I'd like to bring our panel back and start with Antony for 3 minutes.
Thanks. So the question that I got was about religion, and I mean it's a very important question everywhere, not just in Lebanon. Is religion the problem? This is a very central question. We have the echo again. I see. Let's go. Okay, there we go. Well, in what sense is the first part of it? I mean, we live in a religiously sectarian society, as I described. So obviously religion plays a role in it, but all of these different sects play a similar role in not wanting to advance any kind of progressive or an agenda that carries sexual liberation. So between the religions, there is no problem whatsoever in having this united stance against any kind of movement towards sexual liberation. But is the religion itself the problem? I would argue that it isn't, not necessarily. That years ago, generations ago, this didn't used to be an issue, not as much as it is now. But the religious textbooks haven't changed. What has changed is religion itself. So therefore, if we see religion as an expression of the material changes, that now we have a more conservative family structure, we have a stronger push towards heterosexual families and everything that comes along with it, at least in our context, then we find more homophobia present and more transphobia present. And of course, a stronger push towards having there's very specific gender roles that play a role. I mean, traditional gender roles and the gender roles that are emerging now under this kind of capitalism that is starting to again embrace women in the workplace. So I would place the problem not in religion as much as it is in the class structure of society and in these tools of division. So at the end of the day, both religion and the issue of sexual rights are both dividing us in Lebanon, along with race, along with nationality, along with the kind of work we do in all of these issues. And the only way to really emerge from this, from the crisis that we're in, is by really, as the comrade said earlier on the microphone, to sort of ascend from these divisions. There was one point I just wanted to add. I'm sorry if I'm going a bit over time. That it is a period of optimism. So I might have really described a very long period of change, but now there is a period of optimism with the riots around the garbage crisis, with the migrant workers union that formed only recently, despite the Ministry of Labour banning it from forming, with many other campaigns, social and political movements happening at the moment, and also with a return of LGBT activists and queer activists and radical queer politics and social revolutionary politics around sexuality. It is a very good moment right now. It is a time for optimism for us to bring this politics back into the fore.
Thank you. Just to echo the words of the previous speaker regarding religion, I also don't think that religion is the problem, but it's part of it. What I think is the problem is that the individuals in some of the regions, and as some of you know, that religion is very, very important to African people. And we've been taught in African countries that you cannot be gay and be a Christian or a Muslim. And what we are saying, that's not right. So we are not leaving the churches and the mosques. If they're not comfortable in those churches because we are there, then they should leave, because it's our Jesus as far as it's their Jesus. So if they're not happy with us being in those churches, they should leave. If we all do that, they will accept us. They don't even have to accept us. It's our space. We should accept them, not them accepting us. Then we've challenged many religious leaders when it comes to homophobia. But if you challenge them on religion, then they will say, our culture says this and that. If you win them on culture, they will say, but the law says this and that. If you win them on that, they will say, you're anti-government anyway. So you can see that they don't have arguments. Some of them just have hatred, which we are trying to get rid of. But the most important thing, as the previous speaker said, is visibility. If we create more visibility among various communities, like as we've done in the African communities, if you go on our Facebook page, you will see smiley LGBT faces there. And it's really working out. Because I remember in 2014 when President Museveni came here, we were protesting outside his hotel in our own language. So there's no way you could say that those are not my people. No. His people were protesting outside. So you cannot say that it's the West. No. Yes, if you look at the Islam religion, there are some LGBT people. What we need to do is to celebrate them and support them and increase their visibility. But if we concentrate on the few individuals who are, bad, who are preaching hatred, then we're going to alienate even the good ones in the community. I've seen that happening in my community. Because they used to say black people are homophobic. No, we're not. Just some few individuals. But we need to celebrate and support the good individuals. So because of time, I'll wrap up and say, please keep supporting these communities that are raising up against these persecutions, refugees, asylum seekers. We are still facing a lot of problems. Yesterday, we had a meeting talking about Brexit, and many of our members, including me, so worried. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? A, B, C, D. So we need more support. Please get on our Facebook page, sign our petition, share it. Whatever you can do, please support us and other communities. Thank you so much.
I'll be brief, but I just want to pick up on the contribution from one of the speakers who says that he was a Christian white male and didn't feel like he had a right to talk about these issues. Before I get to what I'm going to say and kind of about his points about persecution, again, maybe controversial, but I think when it comes to the LGBT community, I think it doesn't matter whether you're a straight, white, Christian, Muslim, male, everyone has a right to speak about these issues. This campaign is actually, Liam is a heterosexual, white, tall, bald tanker driver, and he's helped me out with this, so we've kind of driven it. I think that if we're going to kind of go down those roads, it's just important to make sure that it's the people who have actually suffered the oppression that are the first on the microphone, but that microphone is open to everyone, in my opinion. He spoke about persecution. I think it is important that this is why it's important that we discuss these issues in schools, because we're not going to understand why these atrocities happen, and we're not going to stop these atrocities from happening unless we can actually get to the root of why they happen. And it's a lot more than just talking about. So, to be honest, in the media, we try and stay away from talking about sex. We don't talk about religion because it scares people, and if we're going to win this argument, we need to frame it in a different way. Everyone thinks if you're talking about LGBT education, it's about sex, and it's not. It's about much more than that. So we'll talk about, it's as simple as saying to kids, some boys love boys, some girls love girls. That's fine for PR, but when we actually sit with the government, it's a lot more than that. And I think what has to be that we have to discuss things like heteronormativity. We have to discuss masculinity, because masculinity and masculine ideals and what young boys in particular are told to be is that's what breeds sexism and homophobia. And we have to be discussing gender roles. So it goes a lot further than just LGBT inclusive education. We need to be bringing in kind of all young kids into the kind of framework. But masculinity is the key point for me, because that's what leads to inner hatred, and it's what leads to external hatred. I thought that I wasn't man enough by being gay, so that's what led me into kind of a lot of problems. And it's masculinity is a big deal. I hate masculinity. I hate men. Get on. And faith as well is the other key point. I just wanted to point out that before I started this campaign, I was quite anti-faith. I'm an atheist. I went to a Catholic school where I was told that I was going to hell because I was gay, or that God gave AIDS to try and get rid of people like me. So that I didn't like faith through a lot of my kind of teenage years. But since doing this campaign, I'm going to just be completely honest, it has changed quite a lot of my opinions, and we have supporters. The Iona youth community is a community of 3,000 Catholic young people. They again unanimously voted to support our campaign. We have reverends of churches. We are in touch with bishops just now who are open to meeting with us, and in fact we've got a meeting set up with the Scottish Catholic Education Service in August. And while I don't think it's going to go very well, at least they were receptive to meeting with us. And we have Amir Anwar, who most of you will probably know, has been very vocal, very supportive of the campaign, and we are actively now at this point, because we've won the argument in terms of the general public, we've won the argument in terms of the politicians. Now at this point what we're actively trying to do is break into faith communities, because what's inevitably going to hit us eventually is we can do this in non-denominational schools but not in Catholic schools, and they actually can't, 'cause it's against the law. I mean, the Catholic schools, whether they like it or not, kind of legally have to do it. But we are trying to kind of break down this argument and this whole idea that I had not too long ago, a couple of years ago, that LGBT and faith are mutually exclusive things, because they're not. And we do need to kind of break down that argument, and I guess it ties into the LGBT against Islamophobia as well, but it does start with schools, and this is why schools are so important. And we have to turn our experiences and our struggle and our voices into a political weapon, and we have to politicise this entire thing. And there was talk of Pride, Pride Glasgow. There was a Free Pride in Glasgow. They were very criticised for being commercial, but again, because we politicised this entire thing, because we politicised my own suicidal thoughts, because we politicised the self-harm, because we politicised those things, Pride Glasgow has now essentially jumped onto our coattails, and the entire march is going to be about the Thai campaign and inclusive education. So politicise the issues, and everyone else will eventually get on board, is what we are finding, at least.
And before I bring Nicola back, I'd just like to ask you all to make sure that you like the LGBT Against Islamophobia Facebook page. It's a brilliant way of keeping up to date with the campaigns, and we need you to spread the word as much as possible.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody that's contributed. It's been a really fantastic meeting. We are the majority. We're the 99%. Right? The 1% are in a massive crisis at the moment. They're the people that run society. They run the world. They run the system. We're not part of that. We're the 99%. We are the majority. Whatever our sexuality, whatever our nationality, we have a common interest in stopping the disgusting degradation, the persecution, the poverty, and the everything that working class people across the world suffer. Now, we talk about the kind of moral outrages of this kind of persecution that we've heard about tonight, but it's a very logical part of the kind of society we live in. We live under capitalism. We live in a class society. The ruling class uses ideas, uses exploitation to divide us so that they can run society more easily. They use oppression. They use ideas about different groups in society to make us blame one another for the deprivation that we suffer, for the difficulties that we suffer. And so that they can carry on exploiting us and increasing the wealth that we are working to create. That wealth should belong to us, and it should be put to good use. At the moment, it's put to use in war and in oppression, in subjugating people. That they actually, the kind of oppression that Edwin was describing costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to treat people in that disgusting way. It costs a lot of money to train people to be willing to kill other people for the British state, because that as somebody said, you're born to love and you're taught to hate. At the moment, in this country, we can see that the ruling class is in absolute crisis. And while we're talking about the unity that we're building and we're reaching out and we're building unity against Islamophobia across our communities, we're saying it doesn't matter what sexuality you are, you can fight against gay oppression. You know, everybody is united and we're building that unity. But at the same time, we've got to remember the ruling class is in a massive crisis. It's in a political crisis. The Tories are falling apart. There's an economic crisis. The stock markets, are terrified. The Labour Party is in crisis. We're seeing an enormous amount of crisis. Now, Edwin, you asked for our support. I think the biggest support we can do is just hit the Tories right where it hurts and get rid of them and their disgusting, hateful policies, their horrible, vicious austerity, and they are using racism to push austerity through. That's what's the point of it. That's the point of oppression. It's to exploit people. It's to draw the wealth that we create up through society so that we blame one another and they can do it more effectively. So I think, as well as signing Edwin's petition, we're going to support the teachers on strike. They're on strike on Tuesday. It's against the academisation. It's against the privatisation of schools. This is vital. We've got to dismantle the Tories' project to milk the welfare state. That we have to do. We've got to use these opportunities. And on July the 19th, it's a massive opportunity for every single person in this room to build for the demonstration on July the 19th, where we're going to have a demonstration against racism and against austerity in London. 16th. Thank you very much for correcting me. It's July the 16th. It's a Saturday anyway. On July the 16th, I would like to invite the Out and Proud Diamond Group to march with LGBT against Islamophobia. I would like to invite every single campaign in this room to march together against oppression and against austerity. I hope that everybody will come and march with us on that day. If you're not a member of the SWP, you should be. We fight on every front and we fight to hit the ruling class where it hurts, and we fight because we want to change this sick, disgusting world. We want to turn it on its head. Sue's right. The people running society should be the people in this room, the people who do the work, the people who care, the people who understand what human need really is. So please join the SWP. Thanks for coming.